York Information Security Meetup / the Cyber Guild. It's a couple minutes past noon. I have the great pleasure to introduce Mike Wilkes, who's a CISO for SecurityScorecard, and is a long timer. Has been on the New York Information Security Meetup events. I think this is the third time, right? When you were doing kind of different roles back.
That's true. First time virtual. The first two times though were face to face back in the day, pre-COVID.
I know, and that was amazing. I remember we were in New York City. We had an amazing view. I can't remember. It was one of the legal firms that were hosting us, and I really hope that we can get back to that at one point. I really miss that. That personal interaction. That people grabbing a slice of pizza and a beer, and socializing. That's something that fortunately virtual does not cut it. I guess it's something that we'll have to tolerate. So why don't we kick it off by I always find it super fascinating, Mike, that you have great background and history in terms of how you got into the field. So why don't we kind of like just tee it up like that, and then for the people that are not familiar with your background, how you got to be in cybersecurity and how you became a CISO, maybe kind of fast forward through that. That'd be great.
Sure. I'll keep it on the short side this time, because when we spoke, what was it, November, I think, last year?
Yeah.
I got to tell the full story, and one of the things, you're right, the live interaction, the performance, of a conversation like ours in front of a group has feedback, right? Laughter and eye contact and body language. And so that is kind of lacking now. But one of the advantages, I guess, Zoom and these kinds of meetings has is logistics, right? Everyone can show up, not be late, not be stuck in traffic, not find parking, things like that. So there's trade-offs. But anyway, my name is Mike Wilkes, and I am now the CISO for SecurityScorecard.com. And a quick, description of that for those of you who haven't heard of it. I've been following the company myself since at least 2015, but it was started in 2013. So it's a 7-year-old startup, and the mission is to help make the world a safer place. And we basically scan the internet using open source intelligence and signals that we can observe from headers and patching cadence type indicators to come up with a rating, a score, right, letter grade like A through F. And we help hopefully security teams surface their good work towards the board of directors and the executive team. And so I'm doing that, and I'm also being given explicit permission to join sessions like this and talk about security and my experience. And so I came to InfoSec through a different path than many people. I came to it through philosophy, and you'll find out in the course of this chat why I think that's relevant and not just an interesting anecdote. But I started, out in the Department of Education, as a philosopher, working for K-12 public education, educational technology schools out in California for the Far Western Lab. I was responsible for California, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, and model technology, educational technology projects. And of course, along came the internet, and this joke went over last year pretty well, when Al Gore was inventing the internet, right? He came along, and suddenly we had this World Wide Web. That suddenly became my career. It used to be a hobby, computers, bulletin boards, abusing computers for a living, essentially. It became my career, and I gave up the indentured servitude of working for the Department of Education and trying to make education better, and started building websites and working in South of Market in San Francisco. 3rd and Bryant, I walked into the offices at Organic Online back in, I think, 1998, and ran what would now be called the DevOps team. That gave Starbucks its first website, launched PlayStation.com for the Sony PS2 debut, gave Macy's its J2EE e-commerce instance, built out infrastructure for Blockbuster, a really prescient technology company that's not around anymore, unfortunately. Be kind, rewind. Remember that? Um, But anyway, so I built websites, went through the whole .com rise and fall. I like to call it the roaring 20s of our generation. Survived 5 rounds of layoffs, was the last man standing. Decided to quit, moved to Europe, built infrastructure there for KLM, ING, Rabobank, built systems that control power plants. And so it's really quite broad. A lot of people would follow maybe one area of technology and kind of grow like a pine tree, right, in that same direction and just keep advancing it. I've been a little bit more like a bee, flitting from flower to flower in different industry and different sectors. So I've worked in retail and energy and travel and financial services, of course, when I moved back to the US. Worked at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, ran the infrastructure for AQR Capital. And then, of course, the fun one that I like to mention, I used to be the head of security at Marvel for 2 years, where it was my job to keep Iron Man safe. And that was no easy task. We were attacked 100,000 times a day by rabid fans as well as competitors and nation states. And if you saw Endgame, you know what happened after I left, unfortunately, to Iron Man. But anyway, that's sort of the quick and dirty. But I'm a hands-on CISO. I love to share information. We raise, our level together the more we share. I don't know if any of you are part of the ISACs, but I just started attending some of the ISAC meetings as a contributing and associate member. And so they had a cybersecurity meetup for the the retail and hospitality ISAC last week. And that was great. It was a great community of practice going on there, people sharing information. And I'm really happy to continue to get involved in supporting best practices and ideas about how we do our job and how we enjoy doing it and how we survive doing it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, so this is, your first role at the vendor, right? Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I mean, when I was building websites, we were a services provider and integration provider as well for a lot of those companies. But yeah, this would be, a lot of people are congratulating me saying, welcome to the dark side. And I was like, I don't know, I used to work for Disney. That's the empire. The dark and the light are all one, right? Just like Agent Smith in Neo in the Matrix. It's all manifestation of the one.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, like, how does that feel to be on the dark side, but then you beat me to it. So what attracted you specifically to SecurityScorecard? And why don't we, because you mentioned them specifically, maybe you can kind of like describe, what the need is. Obviously, it's a 7-year-old startup, as you mentioned. What attracted you to the company, and what specifically, how do you specifically help out enterprise? That'd be great.
Sure. I think the thing that attracted me to the company was that third-party risk is a huge thing, whether you're paying attention to it or not. So the weakest link is always attacked in the chain, and the bad guys go for the weakest link. So think of the point of sale compromise of Target through the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning provider. Blame them, shame Target for having a back end, that combined the heating and ventilation, systems with their e-commerce platform that got them onto the point of sales, and the bad guys were able to put a $2,000 exploit into play. But we all have third-party risk. We all rely on third parties, and we don't really know what their security posture is. And there could be 2 vendors you're looking at. One example I've been using lately is contactless registration systems, right? When people open their doors again for business, they're going to want to have contactless registration systems, like an iPad on a stand, barcodes, facial recognition, maybe things like that. And how do you quickly stand up something like that? If you found or shortlisted 2 or 3 vendors, you could go to SecurityScorecard, type in their domain name, and boom, you get an instant 12-month history of any breaches they've had that we know about, of their patching cadence across 10 different factors that include network, health, hacker chatter, all sorts of really useful, like I said, OSINT, right? Open source intelligence that we gather by scanning the whole IPv4 IP space every month and identifying, what's out there and attributing it to people. It's a tough job, and it's such a powerful engine, but we don't really make the scores. I want to make sure that that's an important point to note. We create the engine, And the engine produces the score based on what you do with your site. So if you're running a vulnerable WordPress site, that'll get flagged, right? You don't have the latest versions. Someone could take it over, distribute malware through it. And so we help you do that for yourself, for scoring yourself. And we also help you do it for your vendors. We score Google, we score Microsoft, we score Amazon, right? We score Disney, all sorts of large entities that might be a part of your product and supply chain. And if you have a better understanding of their risk, you can protect yourself better. And mathematically, there's a lot of great smart data scientists on the team that are helping us establish mathematically that if your score drops below a C, your likelihood of a breach in the near future is like 5 to 6 times more likely than a company that has a B or higher. And so we've proven that this is a proactive tool, right? We're showing you the risks before they get exploited. And an ounce of prevention, they say, right? It's worth a pound of cure. So who needs, all these reactive, quick tools? Well, I think we all need them as well. We need defense in depth. But the more money and the more budget you can put into proactive technology and tools to help you avoid having a breach and an incident and losing months and weeks of time, dealing with it, the better. NIST is picking up on these preventative approaches as well.
So some would argue that it's not just third party, but more so like nth party, in the sense that what about the vendors, right?
True. Yeah, there is a supply chain, and the chain doesn't have 2 links, one to the left of you and one to the right, or maybe 3 links because you're a link. You need to understand the upstream of your vendors as well. And so you can throw in any company, really. We have 1.5 million rated companies. I think one of the competitors in our space has maybe 170,000. So we're at least, or close to 10x, the coverage. And to be able to have a consistent score and look at these things and be alerted when someone's score goes up or down, or one of my favorite things, of course, is all the breach, data that comes in. We have a Slack channel with a breach bot in it. And so I like to check that every day. That's the funnest part of going into work. It's who got breached today? And are they a customer? And how can we help them to not get breached by understanding, how to do proper basics and hygiene?
So where does SecurityScorecard find that information? And can the customers or the kind of the companies that get scanned or get maybe not scanned, it's not the right word, but that have findings, can they do something about it? Can they increase their score? Or how's that process works? Is there a closed loop between what you find is
correct? Yeah, with our platform, it's a 2-way street. We have a resolution button, and you can click it and say, I've mitigated or resolved this finding, and we will then verify it and close it. And so you can grow your score from a low score to an A. By doing the things that are recommended, because we have the actual mitigation information. For example, one of the most common things that a lot of people have been lazy about that they really need to pay attention to is HTTPS everywhere, right? People are like, well, it's just a brochure site. I don't have any relevant data on it. It's a marketing site. What's going to happen? But if you don't put it on HTTPS, Google's going to start flagging you. Chrome is going to start saying these are bad things. We're doing that same kind of thing, right? So we can report and tell you how to put an HSTS, strict control policy headers on your site, point to the documentation to help you do that. So we're not just saying, oh, red flag. We're actually pointing you in the direction of how to mitigate and resolve the finding.
And do companies get caught by surprise in the sense that they, come across findings that they feel are misplaced, or what's kind of the reaction typically for? I'm assuming anybody who gets A+ that doesn't come and knocking on your door saying, "Hey, that's great, thank you very much." I should
have a B. You guys don't know me very well, do we?
Right.
Like
so what's the reaction? Is how does that work?
It's mixed. We have some fans that are definitely using the platform to show a differentiator, right? And to say they're better than their competition. But sometimes there are false positives, and sometimes attribution, or not sometimes, attribution is a hard job. IP space is changing. Like it's like a river flowing, changing every day. And to be able to do that and keep up with that, take for example, Google's IP space, right? They have a huge IP space. And for a while they had a really bad score, but we needed to talk with them and work with them and figure out which net blocks are used, for crawlers and which ones are part of maybe a honeypot that they're operating, where they're trying to gather malware and signals intelligence. We operate one of the top 5 sinkholes as well to gather that information. That's not cheap to maintain either, but we have real signals telling us what's happening. And when a company comes in and they see a score, they can get in touch with us and help improve it. And the ones that are shocked, a lot of times it's a good, valid external confirmation. Like a lot of companies use us for discovery. Think of rogue IT, right? Someone gets a credit card, stands up an AWS account, starts running some little site because their IS team didn't have the turnaround time that they needed, right? Bad on that marketing team that sets up that rogue site. But it's a risk, and the CISO for that company has to be aware of it. So a lot of times our attribution and our scanning of certificates and headers and IP blocks and CNAMEs, that all helps you actually discover things that you didn't know were there. And that's, I think, one of the other values of the platform, not just knowing what the risks are that are presented to the bad guys, because this is like the hacker's view of you, but it also helps you discover stuff that you didn't know was out there.
Now, what about the scoring mechanism? Is that fixed, or does that change over time? And then depending on, certain vulnerabilities that come out and change the kind of the risk score and so on, is that something that potentially changes, or is it fixed?
It changes. We do calibrations every month because the world is changing. You are changing, and your risk and your vendor risk is changing. So we have recalibration activities that help us refine the engine that generates the scores. And it would be nice to think that you can have one score and then it's good, kind of like a credit score for a while. But think of the old days with the meter readers, in the electric company. They used to come out and check your meter once a year, and they would have one data point per household. Now they have IoT, smart meters, you have 5-minute time series data coming in from these things. And so that's the same kind of transformation that I'm seeing that I think is needed in the security and third-party risk management tool space like we are in.
And since you have such tremendous visibility into the overall state of affairs from a risk perspective, who are the biggest offenders, and who does security well? Like from a vertical perspective, since you have a real insight, quantifiable insight to how are things from a security standpoint for the enterprise?
Well, we could start with election.
Yeah, let's start there.
Offices per state. Right?
Can of worm.
I think that we have some guidance coming out. We've gathered up all 50 states and a couple of territories like Puerto Rico and even Washington D.C. And we're looking at comparing the maturity of their security postures, which is not great. I mean, universities often have Ds as well. Columbia and NYU are both, in that challenge space, right? Because they're usually typically understaffed. I mean, who's overstaffed in IT people or InfoSec people at this time? Almost no one.
Like your careful use of words, challenge space.
Yeah. But think about, all of the professors that are lighting up websites that think they're system administrators, the university doesn't have the resources to keep track of that. And so, certainly financial services has the threat of external regulators. And a lot of companies that are not in a regulated industry miss the teeth, of an external, extrinsic motivator to get it right, or you're going to get fined, right? I know when I was at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, we had daily FTP upload and data transfer requirements that would start, fines, on a meter for every minute that the file wasn't there. And so if you can't build robust, fault tolerant, resilient infrastructure, then you're going to suffer, and not be able to swim with the big boys. Who's good at it? I like to think along the lines of phishing awareness, for example, because we're all vulnerable to phishing. And industry averages, I think, about 10-12% of people that get sent a phishing test email will fail. But that's higher in like media and entertainment. People that spend a lot of time in the sales orgs are, of course, getting lots of cold call emails and generating lots of cold called emails. So those industries, oftentimes have a higher risk factor. And then, of course, medical. I would really, find it challenging if I were a CISO for a hospital right now, because your attack surface is huge. Your risk is not just devices going down, but people dying, and you're not allowed to patch your devices because the vendors that provided that, Internet of Things heart pump, or defibrillator, is still running Windows XP, and it's an embedded system, and you can't upgrade it without breaking the contract. So some sectors have it really, really tough, and it's our wish, to help make it better for people, so they at least cover the basics. We don't know the inside-out perspective on what other mitigations you might have to stop certain vulnerabilities from being exploited, but certainly if you attack the outside-in perspective, that at least gives you, a good baseline, good foothold. I think somebody in the chat mentioned, how do you make this kind of information intelligible to the board level? And that's one of the reasons why we chose the letter grades, because everyone understands that metaphor, right? And an A might be your total score, but you could still have something that's like a B level within that. And so there's always room for improvement, is what I'm saying. Nobody's perfect. Even the most secure organizations, like the NSA or something, they have areas where they can improve in process and tools and people. And so if we can help you know where to put your resources, the limited resources you have, then we're helping make you and the world a safer place.
What's interesting as well is you mentioned specifically that there are organizations out there that don't have the expertise to elevate themselves, right? Out of curiosity, do service providers use SecurityScorecard to potentially see where the gaps are and then provide that coverage to their clients, especially the MSSPs, the partners that provide these sort of expertise to mitigate?
Yeah, definitely. We have some customers that have hundreds or thousands of slots for monitoring companies, and they take advantage of our engine to identify these vulnerabilities, these findings, these risks, and they help their companies, implement it. Because we're not necessarily doing, the mitigations for you, but we're working on a marketplace where we have integrations with third parties to help you resolve the findings that show up on your scores. And it's a good ecosystem to support, because if we, make sure that everyone's aware of what their exposures are, then they can put some budget into getting them remediated. And the marketplace is a good way to help do that. We also have a natural affinity with cyber insurance and insurance companies that are using the ratings as a part of their algorithmic assessment of risk for credit and financial services as well. And so that's a natural fit.
So I would love to dive deeper into the cyber insurance, because it seems like it was on the news lately that potentially something happens. Company has a cyber insurance policy, and then when they file a claim, the company says, "Oh well, this is outside of the policy." How mature is currently the industry of cyber insurance, and is this type of security ratings really affects the actual premium, or is it something that is just currently being worked at?
You would think it would. I was on a call with a banking CISO the other night, and he was wondering why the insurance business hasn't really kind of sewn this up. I mean, think about it. You go in for an annual health check with your doctor. They do a blood draw, they check your weight, they check your height, they calculate your BMI. What's the digital equivalent of your BMI? These are just the fundamentals of who you are as a company and your cybersecurity posture. And they don't do anything like that, right? They'll write a policy, against, my left hand, as easy as they will against, a really risk, averse, NIST compliant CSF, kind of institution. So I think it's a bit Wild West still. And one of the incident response managers, director of incident response for managed services at Cisco, was giving a talk at like, I think it was a Delmonico steakhouse or something, which is why I was there. But he was offering some really great insight into these 5 o'clock Friday phone calls that he gets saying, we've been breached, ransomware, or, we've got something going down, we're being attacked, DDoS, whatever. And he was saying that some of the insurance companies are starting to get wise and say, we will give you a discounted premium if you have, and then insert name of Cisco product here, plus a bunch of Apple tools, plus Cisco Meraki or something, where you're influencing the security posture and policy implemented on a bunch of potentially secure endpoints, laptops, mobile phones, with a trusted enclave, things like that. And so I think that there's room in the future for that kind of partnership to happen in a meaningful way, right? Not just partnering for the sake of partnering, but you really do actually have a lower risk profile, and you really ought to pay a lower premium, right? Think of actuarial science for breaches. If you can apply that in this case, the math should work out.
Yeah, and as you mentioned during this conversation, you keep track of also past breaches, right? You keep track of information that happened or that has.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things when I first logged into
Right.
the platform and saw what it could do. You just go to the history tab, and suddenly you have 12 months of history. So the interesting thing is, I didn't think about looking at DocuSign until the company I was working at wanted to start processing electronic signatures with DocuSign. And so I went and looked, and I saw, oh, DocuSign had this breach. And it takes me directly to the article, and I see their score had been going down leading up to it. And so it supports the model that, OS intelligence, open source intelligence about your security posture is a predictor. Right, and that's kind of what we need in this space, is to, not necessarily, you can't say you're not going to get breached, right? Everyone's going to have some type of data spillage or data leak or some type of incidents. It's just when, not if. And so if you know when it's going to be and you can kind of predict it mathematically, you can look at these indicators that we provide, as well as maybe inside out from some of your vulnerability scanners, Qualys, or Nessus or other tools. The combination of the tool is really, really, of course, powerful, because then you get the 360 view of risk for yourself. And then if you do the same for your vendors, we're looking, potentially partnering, to help expand, our integrations to include some of that inside out data.
Yeah, and you mentioned, just like your, health history, right? If you have a past history of being breached, that should potentially affect your premium on cyber insurance, right? Because
correct. Yep.
It's something to do either with the culture or the type of tools you use, or even the visibility. As I mentioned, Marvel was very visible to the population of hackers that was out there. So from aside from the kind of the enterprise and who does that well, so what do you see, again, just from your now being able to have this wide and deep view of the industry, what are the kind of the gaps right now that you see are currently unfulfilled in terms of security? And do you see these, being filled or being mitigated in the next, 6 to 12 months? And maybe you can tie it into like election security as well. What are kind of like the main concerns, aside from, for example, the traditional phishing? What's out there right now that you see is being risky?
Sure. Well, what I've noticed, and this was even before getting some of the insights and data that I have access to now across sectors at SecurityScorecard, is that the shift to containers has introduced like a 3 to 6 month lag on embedded software libraries and packages. So people need to be minting and giving birth to new golden image containers pretty much on a weekly basis, if not weekly, then monthly. But they're not, right? So if they're once a year, they're just casting a new image and including the latest, I don't know, for example, an embedded Tomcat, right? Or an Apache, Apache web server, or Nginx, or, MySQL, any type of packages that might show up in a container. People were better actually at patching bare metal and VMs than they are at patching their security of their containers. And it's a discipline thing, because the automation and tooling and technique is there, right, to be able to give birth to new ones. And infrastructure as a code is a mantra that many of the DevOps and DevSecOps people, adhere to. But in practice, I still see a fair amount of risk living inside of the containers, and just there being a lag. And so it's a lot easier, I guess, for people to do a scan with some of these tools and patch and remediate VMs and bare metal instances faster than remediating their container images.
It's super interesting. There's probably companies out there as we speak that are looking to provide some sort of.
Oh yeah, and you see people eating each other's lunch in the security vendor space. Who was it? I think it was Palo Alto that bought Twistlock or CrowdTwist or Twist Crowd or Twistlock. I can't remember
recently.
What the name of that one was, but it was a Twist something, and it was container-based security, and they needed to move into that space, right? There's a lot less happening on-prem load balancers. F5 purchased Nginx, and now they have this incredible WAF module that they can implement, for crowdsourced WAF mitigations. And so I think there's a logical consolidation happening in some of this space, but we're still 0.1, 0.2 level of maturity. Even the scanners, are still trying to figure out how to get connectors into the cloud service providers to even have visibility into the risks that are deployed into these images, because they're ephemeral, right? They're auto-scaling, they're being born and dying in less than an hour or less than a day. I like to call them Junebug instances because they have such short lifespans. How do you implement security across something that's constantly changing? Well, you have to do it in the golden image, of course.
Yeah, and it's really truly amazing. Being a senior guy now, did you still keep abreast of technology? I mean, it's not trivial. I've talked to people that are, what happened is that they go up and basically become managers, and then they find themselves kind of losing that skill set. How do you keep abreast of all the latest and the greatest? And again, just you don't necessarily have a hands-on experience these days, right? I mean, assuming you
I do actually.
Okay, so
for my last several roles, actually going all the way back to actually, I've never given up root. Come to think of it, I can't speak with conviction to my colleagues, in the executive team, if I haven't seen stuff myself firsthand, because there's a bit of a phone game kind of thing that goes on there, and we like to have a policy of no surprises, and everyone should be able to surface, their worries and the concerns. But look what happened in NASA with the space shuttle and the O-rings, right? People knew that there was a risk, but they didn't have a culture of letting it be surfaced and stop, the mission from going horribly awry. And so NASA actually started something called a pre-mortem, right, instead of a post-mortem. So this pre-mortem concept is, okay, how is this going to fail and why? And let's discuss it before we launch. But yeah, the how to stay abreast. One of the things I do is I go into Slack and I create the RSS integration. And then I have about 20, 25 different RSS feeds that send me all of the news articles from, various publications and professionals, that are smart cookies. And that way I kind of have this news magazine that I can just browse every day and keep tab of which things are trending, because it's tough, to consume that information. So I let other people, consume it for me. They surface it into an article because they're the tastemakers, they're the bellwether, some security people like Krebs, Bruce Schneier, different folks. I, of course, bring in the major vendors like AWS and Cisco and Dell SecureWorks, and I have all their threat intelligence. And this is all free, right? These RSS feeds are not expensive. They're no pay. And you get a lot of good visibility into what's trending. And you'll see a certain topic or story pop across several different venues or channels. And that way, you're triangulating, your finger on the pulse, right?
Yeah, no, it is fantastic. I think we should probably do a session on how to do that, maybe a hands-on session on how to create something like that.
It's just /feed space subscribe and then the URL. It's really
perfect.
easy.
We probably don't have to do that then. Quick question. So you bring up Greek historians and philosophers, right? So you were big into providing examples from that. The last article that you published was by the ancient historian Heraclitus. Heraclitus, yeah. It says you can never step into the same river twice. So what was that all about? And then maybe in your opinion, where's the kind of the fit between the philosophers, and then how does that fit into the kind of the realms of cybersecurity?
Sure. I've been shopping this one for a while as an analogy, and I think it's quite powerful. So an analogy needs to be a little bit dissimilar and a little bit familiar in order to teach you something from what you know about something that you might not. And so I like the "never step in the same river twice" quote from Heraclitus, because it captures, for me at least, the constantly changing, ebbing and flowing of the security threat landscape. It's not like the bar has been raised. They're think of like a pole vaulter, right? They raise it, they come and they run at the bar, and then they try to cross it, right? Or the high jumpers or whatever. That bar is so static, even between changing, right? It's fairly static. The river, though, is different color every day, different height, different flow rate, different types of events affect it. And the analogy for me really works as well when you talk about navigating your digital journey and planning your InfoSec roadmap. Do you want to raft the Class 5 rapids and get to the next stretch of the river for your maturity, or do you want to take a left at the fork in the river, float in a inner tube with a can of beer and take it nice and easy in this nice oxbow of the river? And so for me, it's much more powerful analogy than moving the cheese, raising the bar, or moving the goalposts, because the goalposts are still the same width and height, right? Even though you may be shifting them left and right. And so for me, I like the analogy because it just has this ability to capture the dynamism. And remember, it's not just the river that's changing, it's us. I'm a different person in January of 2020 than in October. My threat landscape has changed. Back end, everyone working from home. We're all living in a big, tabletop exercise right now of like, what if there was a global pandemic? Go, right? Everyone had to work from home. InfoSec, we're all in that nightmare at the moment. And I think that, for me, philosophy is really important in the coming age of computer and human interaction, and what Tesla's doing with the Neuralink. Can you imagine getting a virus that causes you to have lose the motor control of the left half of your body, right? Like a stroke. These kinds of things are ethical decisions. It's happening now in the automotive industry, right? There's hard-coded logic being put into a Mercedes-Benz as to who to run over on the street. If you're going out of control and crashing, right? Preserve the driver, of course, the one that bought the car. But this is like the trolley, problem, where you have this trolley full of, innocent people headed down, a hill, maybe in San Francisco, and there's a switch, and do you pull the switch and they crash the trolley into this person or let these people die? These are decisions that are being coded into software now, and machine learning and training of neural networks and decision making. And so that's totally the domain of philosophers, right? Or at least it ought to be. If we think about what kind of values we want in there versus what someone just kind of came up with, on a late night hackathon, in their innovation lab, saying, "Oh, would it be really cool if we did this, this cost benefit analysis of whether to run over a baby or an old lady."
Absolutely. And it's truly fascinating, a lot to think about. So, it's funny because I haven't really, scratched the surface of the questions that I wanted to cover today, but we'll probably have another session in the next couple of weeks. But where, kind of be running out of time, but where can people find you? What's the best way to reach you? I know you're online on LinkedIn. If somebody wanted to reach out to you for advice, whether it's SecurityScorecard or otherwise, what's the best way?
Sure. The best way to reach me is through my main two channels, LinkedIn, which is my handle, Eclecticus, kind of a Greek Roman name for eclectic, but it's an eclectic spelling of eclectic, so it's ECLECTIQUS. I like to put the Q in there. It's a nice descender, in the IP space. I own the domain name eclectic.com, although that was from a sole proprietorship many years ago when I moved to Europe. And then, of course, on Twitter, I'm also Twitter, /Eclecticus. And so Twitter is more for, personal, perspectives and, postings and thoughts and thinking. And LinkedIn is for more of my professional contacts. But you can reach out to me and send me a message if you want to know more. We have a great, freemium trial instant scorecard that you can go and check out the platform. I can't think of a single CISO or a single information security professional that couldn't benefit from using our platform. And I don't say that as a dark side vendor. I just say that as a security minded individual. There's such a value there. I mean, think of the cost avoidance of having to hire an InfoSec analyst, 70 to 100K a year to do your vendor security assessments, because they can only do a few, right? And we're doing 1.5 million every month. And so you just leverage that and let your headcount do some of the more interesting work of maybe figuring out which vendors you want to drill down into and send a questionnaire to. And we have a new tool for that as well called Atlas, which is kind of like a lightweight GRC, because we got to get out of doing this whole spreadsheet dance, right? Where I send you a spreadsheet and you send me one, and I spend 5 hours answering your stupid, NIST controls and your 800/53s and your ISO 27001s. I mean, it's just so much time being wasted reproducing these questionnaires and exchanges of them. So we tried to come up with something to help do that, where you basically use machine learning and intelligence, artificial intelligence, to map answers you've already provided, even if it's not an exact match of keywords. So we can take all the different frameworks and you provide your library of responses, and boom, it'll like autofill like 1,000 of these questions for you and save you tons and tons of time.
Super. Mike, it's been a real pleasure as always. And, thank you for taking the time to join us today, and looking forward to the next session. And again, hopefully things are going to open up, and we can do this over beers next time. So thanks so very much for joining, and looking forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you very much for having me, David.
Yeah, take care. Thank you all.